They swapped the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Markets blinked. Then everyone went right back to staring at Bitcoin charts. That is the mistake of the decade. Because while retail was busy watching red candles bleed out of Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs, 2 consecutive weeks of outflows, over $2 billion gone, something far more consequential happened in the plumbing underneath the U.S. financial system. Now the surface confusion makes sense. The Fed chair changed. The OCC charter is pending. The DTCC is migrating. SoFi flipped the switch for retail. These are not 4 random news items. This is a coordinated infrastructure handover, and XRP sits at the cross-border layer of it. Let's do the math. Because this is where the Moonboy narrative dies and the rational thesis takes over. The global foreign exchange market, according to the Bank for International Settlements, turns over $7.5 trillion per day. Annualized, that is roughly $2.7 quadrillion of FX flow per year. Ripple already has commercial coverage in roughly 90% of global FX corridors. That is not a forecast. That is documented partnership infrastructure. Now here is the math the retail crowd ignores. Suppose, and this is conservative, Ripple's settlement stack captures just 1% of the daily FX market. That is $75 billion of value flowing through the XRP ledger every single day. If banks are using XRP as the bridge liquidity asset, they have to hold it on their balance sheets to provide that liquidity. They cannot rent it from thin air. Total XRP supply is fixed at $100 billion. $32 billion is locked in monthly escrow. Roughly $5 billion sits in Ripple's on-demand liquidity pool. The actual liquid float available on exchanges is a fraction of what most people assume. Think about that math. Fixed cap $100 billion, locked $32 billion, lost or dormant, by on-chain forensic estimates, several billion more. Now ask $75 billion of daily settlement flow to route through a token at its current price. The arithmetic does not work at a few dollars per unit. It mathematically cannot. The price has to revalue upwards simply for the liquidity layer to function without catastrophic slippage. This is not a prediction. It is a design requirement. If you have a problem with these numbers, you do not have a problem with me. You have a problem with the BIS, with arithmetic, and with the physics of liquidity. Now layer in agentic commerce. Yellow Network's CEO just stated publicly that B2B agent-to-agent commerce is projected at $15 trillion of throughput across the XRP ledger over the coming years, citing numbers from Gartner and McKinsey. Not crypto Twitter. AI agents need to settle payments autonomously. They cannot wait 2 days for SWIFT. They need 3-second finality on a neutral bridge asset. That is precisely what XRP was purpose-built to be. And one more number. Cross-border payments globally. $150 trillion annually. Even a fractional capture by a single bridge asset rewrites every supply-demand model that currently prices XRP. This is the logical mathematical outcome of the infrastructure being built. Not a guess. Not a Moonboy fantasy. Math. And SoFi, a nationally chartered U.S. bank, quietly switched on XRP deposits for 13 million customers. None of that is being connected for you on mainstream financial media. They are telling you it is a crypto rotation. It is not a rotation. It is a handover. And the world missed the signal. Let me pull back the curtain on what just happened between November 2025 and right now, because by the time the headlines catch up, the window will already be closed. Welcome back. This channel does not do hype. We do not do Moonboy fantasies. We do structure, math, and institutional behavior. The 3 things that actually move price over a multi-year horizon. Today we decode the Fed transition, the OCC charter race, the DTCC's quiet pivot, and what every single one of these threads has in common. Before we go under the surface, none of this is financial advice. This is a briefing. Let's jump in. Let's start with the hard truth. 90% of crypto investors are staring at the wrong screen. They are watching spot price. They should be watching settlement infrastructure. If you are wondering why XRP is being mentioned in the same breath as the Federal Reserve, you need to understand a concept most retail investors have never heard of: the plumbing layer. Every dollar that moves between 2 banks in this country, domestically or across borders, moves through one of 3 rails: FedWire, a CH, or SWIFT for the international leg. These are 60-year-old systems. They batch, they settle T+2, they leak roughly $27 trillion of locked nostro vostro capital sitting idle at any given moment, just to pre-fund payments that have not happened yet. In 2015, the Federal Reserve quietly formed the Faster Payments Task Force. 22 proposals were submitted, 16 completed the process. Ripple, through Ryan Zagan, sat on the steering committee alongside the major U.S. banks. The Fed's own 2017 final report singled out Ripple's interledger solution for improved speed and transparency and addressing cross-border friction. That is the Fed's language, not a YouTuber's. The Fed's. That work became FedNow. FedNow launched as a centralized Fed-operated rail. But here is the part that is not being explained to retail the way it should be. FedNow handles the domestic leg. It does not solve the cross-border leg. And the current administration has openly stated it wants to replace the aging payment stack with a blockchain-based successor. You cannot build that in-house in 18 months. The only way is to plug in a private settlement layer that is already battle-tested. Now layer on what is happening at the OCC. Ripple has a national bank charter application under review. If approved, and this is the part Senator Elizabeth Warren is fighting tooth and nail to stop, Ripple plugs directly into FedWire and FedNow as a chartered institution. Not through Finestra, not through Accenture intermediaries, directly. Now add the new chair, Kevin Warsh. On the record as open to digital assets at the central bank level. On the record arguing the United States must explore digital currency infrastructure to stay competitive with China. There is no documented partnership between Warsh and Ripple. I want to be clear about that because the people telling you he is Ripple's guy are getting confused with Kevin Hassett, who was actually the figure UTO was referencing months ago. But what we can document is a regime change at the Fed from a skeptic to someone who has publicly stated the U.S. needs digital rails. That is the regulatory environment in which an OCC charter gets decided. And then there is the move nobody is talking about correctly. The DTCC, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, the entity that settles virtually every equity trade in the United States, just announced a partnership with the Stellar Foundation to move assets onto a public blockchain. This is on top of the DTCC's existing work with Chainlink and Canton. Read that again. The settlement backbone of Wall Street is publicly committing to multi-chain blockchain settlement. That is the institutional thesis collapsing into reality. Now the surface confusion makes sense. The Fed chair changed. The OCC charter is pending. The DTCC is migrating. SoFi flipped the switch for retail. These are not 4 random news items. This is a coordinated infrastructure handover, and XRP sits at the cross-border layer of it. Let's do the math. Because this is where the Moonboy narrative dies and the rational thesis takes over. The global foreign exchange market, according to the Bank for International Settlements, turns over $7.5 trillion per day. Annualized, that is roughly $2.7 quadrillion of FX flow per year. Ripple already has commercial coverage in roughly 90% of global FX corridors. That is not a forecast. That is documented partnership infrastructure. Now here is the math the retail crowd ignores. Suppose, and this is conservative, Ripple's settlement stack captures just 1% of the daily FX market. That is $75 billion of value flowing through the XRP ledger every single day. If banks are using XRP as the bridge liquidity asset, they have to hold it on their balance sheets to provide that liquidity. They cannot rent it from thin air. Total XRP supply is fixed at 100 billion. 32 billion is locked in monthly escrow. Roughly 5 billion sits in Ripple's on-demand liquidity pool. The actual liquid float available on exchanges is a fraction of what most people assume. Think about that math. Fixed cap 100 billion, locked 32 billion, lost or dormant, by on-chain forensic estimates, several billion more. Now ask $75 billion of daily settlement flow to route through a token at its current price. The arithmetic does not work at a few dollars per unit. It mathematically cannot. The price has to revalue upward simply for the liquidity layer to function without catastrophic slippage. This is not a prediction. It is a design requirement. If you have a problem with these numbers, you do not have a problem with me. You have a problem with the BIS, with arithmetic, and with the physics of liquidity. Now layer in agentic commerce. Yellow Network's CEO just stated publicly that B2B agent-to-agent commerce is projected at $15 trillion of throughput across the XRP ledger over the coming years. Citing numbers from Gartner and McKinsey, not crypto Twitter, AI agents need to settle payments autonomously. They cannot wait 2 days for SWIFT. They need 3-second finality on a neutral bridge asset. That is precisely what XRP was purpose-built to be. And one more number, cross-border payments globally, $150 trillion annually. Even a fractional capture by a single bridge asset rewrites every supply-demand model that currently prices XRP. This is the logical mathematical outcome of the infrastructure being built. Not a guess, not a Moonboy fantasy. Math. While retail is panic selling Bitcoin ETFs to the tune of $1.26 billion in a single week, look at where the capital is rotating. XRP spot ETFs, 15.6 million in net inflows. Solana ETFs, 22 million inflows. Hype ETFs, 72 million inflows. Timothy Messier, head of research at BRN, told CoinDesk explicitly, capital is rotating away from crowded large-cap exposure and toward newer infrastructure narratives. That is not retail FOMO. That is institutional allocators rebalancing toward where the next decade of throughput is being built. Look at the corporate moves. SoFi, the first nationally chartered U.S. bank to offer XRP buy, sell, and hold inside the same application as a customer's salary deposit. 13 million customers. This is not a side project. This is a Tier 1 regulated bank treating XRP as a treasury-grade digital asset. Once one nationally chartered bank does it, the regulatory cover exists for 10 more, then 100. Then it is simply the standard. Look at Italy. Banca Sella, the first Italian bank approved under MiCA to offer crypto custody and transfers. Europe's banking system is no longer watching. It is integrating. Custody, stablecoins, cross-border settlement, rails being built quietly in the regulated daylight. Look at the Ripple Treasury platform. Just signed a strategic partnership with Treasury XL, the largest European community of senior corporate treasurers. The platform natively supports XRP and RLUSD inside a single interface that treasurers actually use day to day. This is not retail education. This is enterprise distribution aimed directly at the CFOs who control corporate cash management. Look at the DTCC again, partnered with Stellar, Chainlink, and Canton. This is the entity that settles every single equity trade in the United States. Their multi-ledger, multi-chain commitment is the largest institutional validation of public blockchain settlement we have ever seen. And XRP, through Ripple's existing institutional relationships, is in the same conversation. Ask yourself the brutal question. Does the DTCC, the most conservative settlement entity on planet Earth, move toward public chain integration without absolute legal and regulatory certainty? Absolutely not. They do not gamble. They position. They sign NDAs. They build for the next 30 years. The signal is clear. But only for those who are actually looking. The calendar between now and the end of the year is loaded. Q3 2026, OCC charter decision window for Ripple. If approved, Ripple plugs directly into FedWire and FedNow as a chartered national bank. That single decision removes every regulatory excuse remaining for Tier 1 bank integration. The wait-and-see money becomes the all-in money. Federal Reserve under Kevin Warsh, first policy cycle. Warsh has publicly stated the U.S. must explore central bank digital infrastructure to remain competitive. His first major policy address sets the tone for the next decade of U.S. monetary plumbing. Every digital asset infrastructure player, Ripple included, is positioned for that signal. DTCC stellar integration milestones, July through October. As one analyst put it, get the champagne ready. The DTCC's multi-chain rollout is the largest capital unlock event in modern settlement history. It validates the entire public blockchain as settlement layer thesis, and every adjacent network, XRPL included, benefits from the same regulatory and technical precedent. Continued ETF flow rotation. Each week that Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs bleed and XRP and Solana ETFs absorb, the institutional positioning becomes more obvious. We are watching a multi-year capital reallocation in real time. When the OCC charter arrives, when FedNow's next-generation upgrade specifications are published, when the DTCC's stellar integration goes live, the risk premium currently embedded in XRP's price vanishes. The price does not climb on those dates. It gaps. The fuse is lit. The countdown is no longer abstract. It is on the calendar. We are moving from an era of abundance to an era of scarcity. Right now, you can still acquire whole XRP tokens. You can still position before the OCC decision. You can still build a meaningful stack while the price reflects regulatory uncertainty rather than regulatory clarity. That window is measured in months, not years. Here is what happens when SoFi becomes 10 banks. When 10 becomes 100. When every nationally chartered U.S. institution offers XRP custody as standard. Tokens move into multi-signature institutional vaults. They move into corporate treasury cold storage. They move into ETF custodial wallets where they sit, locked for the duration of the fund's existence. Once a token enters an institutional vault, it does not come back to market for a 10% profit. It is gone. It is removed from circulating float for a decade or more. Now overlay that with the cross-border liquidity requirement. Every bank that wants to use XRP as a bridge asset for FX has to hold it. Not rent it, not borrow it, hold it. That is dollars chasing a fixed supply asset, with the float shrinking every quarter as institutions accumulate. And here is the part that should keep you awake at night if you are still on the sidelines. When the regulatory clarity gate finally opens, when the OCC says yes, when the Fed publishes its blockchain framework, when the DTCC's chain integrations go live, the risk premium that is currently suppressing the price evaporates overnight. The price does not adjust over weeks. It adjusts in hours. The institutions have spent years trying to shake retail out of their position. The red candles, the lawsuits, the regulatory ambiguity, the endless FUD cycles, that was the cost of accumulation. That was the price institutions paid to position before the rails turned on. The door is closing fast. Soon you will not be buying XRP at this valuation. You will be buying drops, fractions of a token, at a price that reflects the real settlement value of the network. I know it is tough to watch. I know watching Bitcoin sit at 78,000 while ETFs bleed feels like the entire crypto thesis is unraveling. I know XRP grinding sideways while every macro narrative screams rotation out makes you question whether any of this is real. But as an analyst, I am trained to distinguish between noise and signal. The noise is the spot price on a Tuesday afternoon. The noise is a Twitter thread about Ripple buying Circle for $25 billion, which, by the way, is mathematically impossible given Ripple's actual liquid XRP position and the dilution that share-based acquisition would require. The noise is the next round of FUD about the Fed, the SEC, or Elizabeth Warren's next congressional hearing. The signal is the OCC charter sitting on the desk. The signal is SoFi flipping the switch. The signal is the DTCC publicly committing to multi-chain settlement. The signal is the $7.5 trillion per day of FX flow looking for a faster bridge. The signal is a new Fed chair who is not ideologically opposed to digital rails. Being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment the infrastructure goes live and reality catches up to math. The question is not whether the price recovers. The question is who is still holding when the FedNow successor goes live, when the OCC says yes, when the DTCC's stellar integration becomes the template for XRPL. Who is still positioned when $7 trillion of daily FX needs a neutral settlement bridge? That is not a question for the impatient. That is a question for the informed. Let me bring this all home. The Fed chair changed. The OCC charter is pending. The DTCC is migrating to public chains. SoFi turned on XRP for 13 million banking customers. The Ripple Treasury platform just plugged into the largest European community of corporate CFOs. Yellow Network is targeting 15 trillion in agentic commerce on the XRP ledger. The math of $7.5 trillion daily FX flow demands a revaluation of the bridge asset that captures even a fractional share. These are not separate news items. This is one story. The infrastructure handover from 20th century settlement rails to 21st century blockchain settlement is happening in real time, in regulated daylight, and the market has not priced it in because the market is busy panicking about Bitcoin ETF outflows. Price is a distraction. Value is the reality. One is a bubble of attention. The other is a bridge being built underneath the entire global financial system. The question is, are you watching the noise or are you watching the structure? If you made it to the end of this briefing, comment "I see the structure" below. I want to know who is actually paying attention versus who is still staring at candles. If you value deep dive analysis that connects the threads mainstream media will not connect for you, subscribe. Share this with one person in your life who is still confused about why XRP keeps showing up in every infrastructure conversation while everyone keeps telling them it is dead. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. History does not reward comfort. It rewards those who pay attention when the room is quiet. Stay patient. Stay rational. Stay positioned.